We need basic infrastructure to be in place. I'll take a very few examples. If for some people who have been reading news in Africa, there are many countries which still lack power. And you cannot do any transformation of any product without having continuing and in quantity power. So that, of course, can be done by the private sector, but it has to be done also in conjunction with government. On the softer side, we need also to take advantage of AFCFTA. There are issues of transfer, money, moving money here and there. There are issues of the possibility of an African to invest in another African countries. And that also requires a dialogue between government and the private sector. Once we would have dealt with some of those things that are called the basics, which in some other environments are no longer an issue, then we can move forward and very quickly to exporting among ourselves, to taking advantage of opportunities that we may have here in the Caribbean, and certainly making the link between Africa and the Caribbean. Trade finance is always available because it's one of the less risky type of financing, but for this you need deals behind them. So just leave it to the private sector to meet with the private sector counterparts everywhere, and they will also push governments to do the right transformation.
We were able to work on the 20 megawatt solar. The idea is to be able to do an energy mix because we don't have it basically. So whatever can be provided, either through thermal or solar, it will be welcome. And it's providing now the first national grid that we never had. It's existing in the country. And we are trying to drive it down by the fact that of adding renewable energy into the ecosystem. And by doing so, we are able to open up the market. The small SMEs are able to grow, people who are able to do welding and so forth. So you create job creation. And again, I must take you back. Before the partnership that I was talking about, we had about 150 gas stations that were completely closed. And when we got the facility from Afreximbank, at the time it was 30 million import finance line, we were able to open that 150 gas stations. Today, the capital Juba alone, we have about 100 gas stations that were born because of this relationship. So it's real. For such kind of partnership to happen, there has to be an able environment, be it from the government, creating infrastructure, introducing. We couldn't access such facility if a country was not a member to the bank. And I think that environment or infrastructure or platforms are really a necessity for such kind of a partnership to flourish.
Energy is one of the critical things that we need to put in place because if you don't do these things, no one is going to do it for you. You need the energy to drive your operations. You need transportation to ease your logistics, to drive down costs, and also for interconnectivity. Now, talking about Afro-Caribbean businesses, I can imagine the number of man-hour that we've put in place to transit from Africa to where we are today. As against economies like the EU, where you can produce, in Portugal, and actually transport your products to, say, Belgium. The cost is extremely reduced. These things you can do with fast rail. The logistics is reduced. If you try such things in Africa, say from Nigeria to even Senegal or Southern Sudan, you can imagine the cost, enormous cost. And these are the things that if government can harness these opportunities, it will be a lot more easier to make life much more meaningful and sustain entrepreneurs.
Africa is the future. The opportunities that exist in Africa today are the same opportunities that created the Fords, the Rockefellers, the Carnegie, the Mellons, and other titans of industry.
Biggest challenge we have is moving from talk to action. It is easier to travel in the Caribbean in Africa with a European passport than it is with an African passport. That's a problem. We can fix it, so why haven't we fixed it? There is a mentality that says talking is enough. It's not enough. The Afrexim Bank has been a lot of pioneering work in trying to break down those barriers. And the challenge we have is how do we get those things done? The biggest challenge is at the governmental level, the will to act. And if the governments don't create that enabling environment so that people, businessmen such as Mr. Dangote, who was here earlier, and a lot of other businessmen who are trying to get things done, can get those things done, then in the next 40 years, we're still going to be talking about what we need to do. Okay. The fact is that things get done in Africa in spite of, not because of, government support. I'm very excited about the Caribbean initiative because I think that it starts to bring a much wider perspective of what can be done. But in terms of a strategy for growth or for creating the sort of momentum we're looking at, I think it really has to start with the mindset. And that has to be the mindset that says, let's talk, but let's act. And let's not just talk and go home.
A few things we have to do. Number one, lean into the transition fuels. We do have to lean into our fuels that we have. Gas, first and foremost. Facilitate that. Use that as a transition fuel for this cleaner future. That's critical. The second thing also when you come into the renewable space is we have to go a little bit deeper and depend more on the more consistent, replenishable versions of renewables. So you have to think of hydro dams, think of geothermal, where it's applicable. We have to lean into that first and foremost because the run-of-the-mill solar farm and wind are more inconsistent. So as Africans, we want to invest our money into things we can amortize 24 hours a day. So I would say that should form our base load. So we have to, it's definitely something that we can do, just as been said. But with regards to policy, I think actually it's more about quality than quantity. Policy at the end of the day needs to be clear. There should be fewer of them, but very clear. And it should allow a meritocracy of access to resources, funding, and so on and so forth. So there's a plethora of policy that can help, but first and foremost, governments and institutions need to get to the point where they can allow their policies not interfere with private sector.
My most valuable lessons I have learned in life has been through the many business failures that I have experienced. And I take every opportunity when speaking to young people to let them know failure is a part of growth. I boast about my failures. You can fail 100 times. It only takes one success for you to establish yourself.
I really believe that the real challenge we face is not ideas. We have ideas in this room. The real challenge we face is turning talk into action. So if I have a piece of advice as far as strategic imperative is concerned, it's let's focus on how we can maybe talk less and do more.
So I'm gathering talk is cheap, we need more action.